Hi, and welcome. I'm going to be talking about an evidence-based practice article that I have found. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that it took me a little bit to find this article. As a general education teacher, I love math, and I was driven towards trying to find something towards 5th grade math. And I was first brought to an article discussing multiple interventions, but did not technically have a study. From that article, I was able to find the article that we're going to be talking about today. The article that I read and we're going to be discussing is from Sarah Waite and William Theron about examining a pre-teaching framework to improve fraction computation outcomes among struggling learners. This article was very eye-opening to many different things about curriculum and how the tiered systems support students differently and how it can be difficult for students in the general education classroom. Their research question they used when discussing and conducting their study was, what are the effects of using the combined interventions of CRA, which means concrete, representational, and abstract, and pre-teaching on the overall fractional computation outcomes, maintenance of skills over time, and generalization to core curriculum among struggling math learners. And struggling math learners we'll learn about in just a minute about who that represents. So again, their intervention was talking about pre-teaching with the CRA model. So again, the CRA model means concrete, representational, and abstract. So concrete is talking about manipulatives. So in the article, they talked about popsicle sticks and different things like that the kids could physically touch. So in this picture right here, we can see an example of base 10 blocks. We use those a lot in 5th grade in different forms, such as decimals and whole numbers. Then we go into representational, which talks about pictures. Pictures are typically tally marks or dots. So these are taking them one step farther of thinking about that concrete and making them as a picture instead of being able to physically touch them. And then finally, we move to abstract, where we actually start using numbers and symbols. As we can see, we've seen the number 23 in a concrete form with base 10 blocks, a representational form with a picture, and now an abstract with just numbers. So again, the intervention they were using was using the CRA model, but pre-teaching it before a unit. So the student demographic for this study consisted of 32 6th graders from 4 different classrooms in 2 elementary buildings. So this table was provided by in the article, which gives a lot of description. So it also provides the socioeconomics, so students who received free and reduced lunch, a breakdown of race demographic, gender demographic, but also level of instructional support, which I thought was very important to see how many students were receiving what type of support within the building, including that special education. So what students had specific mathematical goals on their IEP. So those were the students who would be represented under the IEP. And again, this is broken down based on School 1 and School 2, but also just overall students. So based on their method, they chose to use a pre-post test formula that allowed them to go through and design their method. So based on the pretest, 2 interventionists decided on these 3 prerequisite skills, which were comparing 2 fractions with the symbols greater than, equal to, or less than, reducing fractions to simplest form, and finally adding and subtracting fractions with like and unlike denominators. The intervention is based like this. Some things that are not detailed are this intervention takes place in a small group setting, in a common area of the building that the school is in. And there are other interventions that happen where the control group, not the treatment group, is taken to another area and not provided math intervention, rather they're provided reading intervention. So the intervention description is talking about the treatment group. So on day 1, the interventionist, which is one of the conductors of this study and a retired teacher who has experience in teaching general education and special education, will instruct the students how to use manipulatives and key vocabulary connected to prerequisite skills that were discussed earlier. On day 2, the interventionist will model the first skill for students using concrete manipulatives. So this would be comparing two fractions using greater than, less than, or equal to, using this with a concrete method. Then on day 3, the interventionist and students would model and practice the same skill, such as comparing fractions, using representational model now, so thinking about pictures. Moving to day 4, students would still be on the same topic or same skill, such as comparing fractions, but this time they'd be completing a worksheet independently using an abstract numbers and symbols to get their answer. This process would repeat with the following 2 skills of simplifying fractions and adding, subtracting fractions with like and unlike denominators with on days 5 through 10. So each day would have 3 days of practice for the child using all 3 steps of the CRA model. Some of the results found were that there was a slight difference when using the pre-teaching intervention with the CRA model compared to no interventions. Based on data, the treatment group scored slightly higher on the post-test than the control group. As well, the treatment group was more likely to represent the problems, so using them in a pictorial form. And finally, the treatment group was more likely to try more questions because of those pre-teaching strategies that were focused on during intervention time. And this comes from the difference between the general education curriculum and the pre-taught strategies. Based on this, this is my biggest takeaway that I have from this article, is the use of manipulatives in all areas of mathematics. So these are manipulatives that in 5th grade we would use. We may not use all of them. In 5th grade we typically do not use a clock or the bear counters, but we will use the other ones. This year in particular, in my classroom, I have decided to create manipulative bags for each of my children to have access to manipulatives. This contains base 10 blocks, so unit cubes, rods, and units, rods, and flats. Sorry. And then we would have pattern blocks would be hexagons, diamonds, triangles, and one more. And then finally we would have the fraction strips, similar to how it looks like in this picture, 1 all the way through 1/12. Throughout the days we will use counters, but a lot of times with the geo boards in particular, we have digital forms of those nowadays. So again, overall, my takeaway is that there is more need to have manipulatives in the classroom, but also pre-teaching students how to use these manipulatives to be effective before moving in to actual physical abstract instruction. Thank you very much.